Hey everybody, welcome to the W124 series, the first of many videos where we try to restore and modify my 1987 Mercedes 300 TE. Now, I'll be posting a couple different videos on this car as well as my Datsun, so we'll get into that a bit later. But in this video, we're really going to just be focusing on the suspension aspect, specifically the rear suspension, and pretty much overhauling the rear end. So I am pretty new to videos. This is kind of my first, I guess, dipping my toes into the videos, or the video sphere. I am naturally a photographer, so that's where I'm more comfortable. So bear with me, there's probably going to be a lot of blips and stuff along the way, and I'm going to be experimenting with a couple different styles to just see where I really like or find my groove really. So if you have any feedback, feel free to drop some suggestions in the comments, whether it's video quality, audio quality, what kind of content you'd like to see. Is there something that, you know, I could focus more on, ramble less, do more cinematic things? So I'm just completely open to any suggestions, or any constructive suggestions, let's put it that way, to what I could improve on. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the series. Right here on the table, I have pretty much all the parts that we're going to be redoing on the rear end. Those with a keen eye are probably going to say that you're missing your camber arms, and now that's because I have aftermarket camber arms in the car. Because these wagons, if you do lower them, what will happen is you'll get a lot of negative camber, which is natural in cars. You lower a car, the wheel will camber itself in. That's perfectly natural. Now, I got camber arms because I don't want to eat through my tires. So there's aftermarket camber arms, which I will link in the description below, from the Camber King. These are the SLS shocks. So these are Sachs OEM replacement shocks. Even before I lowered the car, it was super bouncy, not a lot of rebound. The accumulators have been replaced, and I know people are probably gonna get on my case and say the accumulators are responsible for dampening. That's actually not true. And I'll link a couple of articles, or I guess blog posts or so on, where people are talking. They're a lot more experienced than I am about the shocks and their dampening function. In the case of this car, the accumulators actually do not control dampening. Rather, the shocks control dampening. So if your car is getting bouncy in the rear, or specifically this wagon, with self-leveling shocks, it's gonna suck because these are super expensive to replace, but they don't really go bad that often. So, you know, I could probably get away with not replacing mine. The system works pretty well. It's just super bumpy and bouncy in the rear, and I'm not really fond of it. And when we get down there, you'll see the bushings are pretty much gone. They're on their last leg, so that has to be replaced. So anyway, we've got our shocks, got our rear tie rods, and we got all the other parts that I'll go through in more detail. We've got our bushings, a new filter for the SLS system, even though I replaced it not that long ago, but because we're going to be flushing the system. Because remember, these are hydraulically operated, and when I remove them, we're going to lose some fluid, and the fluid is getting dark again, despite flushing it, which I think is coming from the seals on the inside of here are probably degrading. Now, some people might think this is a W123, where the self-leveling pump had an oil gallery running through it, and you'd have engine oil contamination. This car actually has a tandem pump with power steering pump, so there shouldn't be any engine oil contamination. So it's not exactly the black fluid that that W123 owners are familiar with. This, in the other case, is just turning dark really quickly. I probably didn't do a great job flushing it the first time, but I think that my shocks are starting to disintegrate, or the rubber is starting to come apart, which is a bit of a problem. My accumulator balls are also pretty shot, so I don't think it sent any debris through the system. Everything's flowing as it should, so that's a big plus. But it is the fluid is contaminating pretty quickly. But nonetheless, we'll get that taken care of. Everything will be new in the system, other than the pump and the self-leveling valve. The shocks will be new, so it should be taken care of. I also don't see any debris in the filter that was put in, but I'm going to go ahead and replace it because I'm putting new fluid in. But yeah, this is all supplied from FCP Euro, so shout out to FCP Euro with their lifetime warranty. I hope I don't have to replace these again, but if I ever do, I can submit that for a warranty claim. But I did get more fluid from them through the warranty because I did do the flush before, same with the filter, so huge savings if you go with FCP. Unfortunately, they don't sell the Sachs shocks, but I got these through Auto House. I'll put a link in the description for these, as well as the FCP kit. Now, FCP does sell a complete rear end kit, and it will come with the camber arms, but again, I decided to buy the components individually because it's cheaper than buying the kit, because I don't need the camber arms because I already have those replaced in our aftermarket camber arms. So anyway, that's enough discussion about the parts. Here's how I like to start off. If you can, I'm going to link this in for W124s. If you can get your hands on a factory service manual, and what a factory service manual is just, as the name implies, it's a manual that shops and the dealer will use to replace parts in your car. Now, these are important primarily because of the torque specs, because everything on this car, including bushings, need to be torqued to spec. Otherwise, if you don't torque them, you can really shorten the lifetime lifespan, of the bushings, and I'll show what I mean when I get under the car. So the first thing I like to do is download these, read through them. It kind of gives you step by step, and you know, it helps to know what you're getting into. You might need some special tools. You know, it even has the special tools. Now but you don't necessarily need these exact part number tools. I think it's pretty cool if you can, but they're probably very expensive, and some of them aren't even available. But they're just general torque wrenches, bushing presses, ball joint separators, and so on. So that's all that really is, but really the torque specs are the biggest key that you need out of all of this. So I have all of them downloaded. I have the torque strut, I have the tie rod, how to remove the rear shock absorber. Now I know this isn't an SLS strut, but the torque specs are roughly the same. I couldn't find one for the SLS strut, so I'm just gonna end up following this. Plus it goes through other components that'll be removed in the process that are shared. And then a spring link and replacement of the rubber mounts that go into the rear LCA, or the spring buckets. So we have everything we need. Now it's just a matter of getting it up in the air and worked on. I've already got the front end chalked. And guys, I can't really stress this enough. If you do work on a car and you lift it up, please, please, please chalk the car. So the vehicle is chalked at least on one side. I have both sides chalked. The reason you want to do this is when you're jacking a car up or you bump something, you don't want it to roll off of the jack or the stands or whatever that you're using, because it could kill you. So chalk up the car is first step. Second step is going to be to loosen the lug nuts while the car is on the ground. Then once we get in the air, we're going to remove the wheels, and then we're going to get down to business, because there's quite a lot of parts that need to be removed to get this job done. So lots of rambling, but let's get into it. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and tackle the side right now. I do want to paint these calipers, so the first step here is I'm gonna crack this line. This is a 14mm right here in the back. So we'll crack that off, and then I'm actually gonna cap this with the vacuum cap line. It works pretty well. I'm gonna vacuum line cap this, and then for the other side, the flywheel bolts for this car actually fit perfectly. So if we can see up here, what he painted this caliper. That's the flywheel bolt, threads in perfectly, so the pitch and everything is perfect. So I have some extra bolts there. They also thread into the fuel distributor, fun fact. So they work really well as caps. So that will get threaded in the back, so we don't have any paint contamination getting inside the caliper during the painting process. But this is going to get taken off, sanded down, prepped for paint, and then painted. And then the next step will be to remove our disc. We have one locking nut or bolt here, rather. The disc will come off. We'll disassemble our parking brake, take apart our shield, and then we'll get to work disassembling the various arms. I do have the tool coming in for this lower bushing here. So once that's in here, we can use that to swap both sides. I do need to finish that other side as well. Then we'll place a strut with the brand new struts, bleed the system, bleed the brakes, and it should be relatively good to go. Use 17 mils right here in the back to remove the caliper, pretty standard caliper removal process. And then the 14mm here. I do want to crack this off now because it'll be harder to hold the caliper while trying to crack that loose, though it is possible just to hold it. And this also gets rid of the caliper, so we don't have to have it hanging anywhere. We definitely don't ever want to hang it by the brake hose. That can cause premature brake hose failure. So you can get a bungee cord to hang it if you were doing a brake job or something. But in our instance, we're just gonna get it out of the way because it needs to be painted. So less clutter, less stuff in the way, and works great. So let's get to it. As you can see here, we have our brake caliper. If we were changing pads in the car, most German cars have this and some other manufacturers. It's really nice. Without like this traditional clamshell, we have to unbolt the clam bolts and kind of pull it back to get them out. You actually have these drive pins through here with a little spring clip. So all you have to do is really just knock these pins out. So you start them off by just hitting with a hammer. Obviously the fat end is not the side you want to go through. The skinnier end will pin through. Here's one of the pins from the other caliper. So you can see this side is tapered, so it can't push itself through. It stops, kind of like a head. And this side gets pushed through, so you knock these pins out. We'll see this in real time here in a second. Knock these pins out, knock the clip out, and you just pull the pads physically out the top. So super easy for pad changes. We're going to disassemble our pad, and then even before we move forward, we're going to go ahead and take this flywheel bolt. As you can see, it's the thread pitch. Ooh, this one's a bit crunchy. Interesting. So this bolt, out of all the ones I grabbed, you go figure, has a bit of damage on the thread right here. So it's having a hard time starting. You can see it's not wanting to go any further. So just to confirm that it's the bolt, we're going to take the other flywheel bolt out on the other caliper, which is currently in there. I threaded in perfectly. There it is. We're going to go ahead and thread that guy in and see what's going on. Okay, so still some difficulty. So this definitely feels like it's on the caliper side, but it's threading in. That's interesting. It seems like our caliper threads are a bit either dirty or a little damaged. Now, I haven't taken these calipers off before, so if somebody has, then they could have damaged the threads, but we'll just run it once back and forth a bit. And there we go. Threads are cleaned up, so there we go. Cleaned up. So it was on the caliper side, it's not a bolt. Snug that up just by the hand, don't have to go crazy. So now it's capped. I'm gonna go ahead and knock these pins out, slide these pads out. We're gonna just wire wheel this to get all the rust and grime off, then hit it with brake clean just to get all the grease off of it. Tape just a couple sections off and then just paint it. It's pretty straightforward. So I just finished the last coat on the caliper here, and I think it looks pretty good. I mean, in any case, it's better than the rust pile it was. You know, obviously you'll see down here, didn't spend a lot of time on the inside brackets because there's no point, but it is coated back and front. So this is like a silver metallic with a little bit of blue in it. I think it will go nicely with the wheels. I don't like anything super flashy, which is ironic considering how much metallic there just is in this. I just use VHT engine metallic. I usually don't like VHT's products, but couldn't really find a good color to coat these because usually the most popular are like red, matte silver, and so on. But I kind of wanted to do something different for once. So yeah, I think it looks good. I'll have to do the other three. But yeah, I think this is a good little easy appearance mod to do. Okay, so now with our caliper out of the way, we just need to get the rotor off. It's held in here. There we go. Once you remove the set screw, these are new, so sometimes they get seized on. If it is seized on and you are replacing the rotor, you can hammer it from the back. You can hammer this section to break up the rust. Do not hammer here, however, if you are reusing this rotor. These rotors have like 1,000 miles in the car, so they're really new. I replaced them not that long ago, so they shouldn't even be rusty. But it can help if you put some anti-seize. So you sand this down and put some anti-seize right there. It can help with removing the rotor. I haven't done it. When I did it, I've never had issues removing rotors, at least here where I live, so even though there's a bit of rust here. The paint that they use on the rotors, I think these are ATE rotors or Zimmerman, do a pretty good job of not allowing the corrosion to really get into it. So I haven't had that issue, luckily. Now that I mentioned it, I'm probably gonna have that issue all the time, but nonetheless, that's not a problem anymore. So the next step is we gotta remove our parking brake. The reason being is this parking brake, as it goes around, so a bit of a split off here for the nerd out moment, but the way this parking brake works, it's called a shoe, and this is the drum of the brake, as you can kind of see the wear pattern here. So essentially, the way the parking brake or drum brakes, same principle applies here, is there's a piston. For a hand brake, it's mechanically operated, not hydraulically, and a drum brake, the hydraulic would open this piston. So let me get you guys a little closer, you can see what's going on here. So there's usually a piston here, so if this was hydraulic, it would have rubber. This is mechanical, so there's no need for any rubbers because there's no fluid in here. If you were to press the brake in a hydraulic system, these shoes would actually expand out and they make contact with the drum, and that's what stops the car through the friction. In a parking brake, when you press that cable down, or in a case here, it's a foot brake. In other cars, it's a hand brake. When you pull up, hand brake, foot brake, self-explanatory. These shoes expand as long as it's under tension, and then that holds against the drum and holds the car from moving, so it's kind of a friction force. That's really how drums work. A lot of people hate them. They think they're kind of magic. They're not really magic. They're just a bit of a pain to assemble because, as you can see, they do have springs. So they have a lot of springs because if you think about it, these have to be in a return position. So this will open them, but what's gonna bring them back? What springs them back, right? So these springs will essentially wanna yank them back into that resting position of closed. So that's all it is, but we do have to remove them because there are 3 bolts holding this dust shield on. We have to remove the dust shield, and it actually rotates conveniently where this gap is, and then that allows us to reach everything on the arms and bolts on the back. So super nice that you don't have to remove the hub. I can't see a way to remove this shield completely from the hub without removing the hub itself, which I don't want to do because that involves disconnecting the axle and then a whole bunch of other stuff that I don't want to get into. If I don't have to, it's just extra work. So to remove these shoes, there are these little holes right here. And what you need to do is this spring needs to be compressed and turned, and then this is the set springs for the shoes. That will unlock them. So there's 2. There's one for each shoe, one up here, one down here. And then you can either remove this spring up here, or there's a retaining spring down here, and it's gonna be hard to see on camera, but it's kind of like the spring in here that holds the shoes together. Once you unhook that, you can open the shoes up, and we'll see this here in a second, and remove it from the hub. So fairly straightforward, not super complicated. It's going to be a pain putting it back, I already know, but that's okay. Another thing is, what's nice is I don't have to replace my brake shoes, and usually you don't really have to replace brake shoes unless the person previously had them on while driving. That's really when they wear, because these don't really wear that much because they're not actively moving or trying to stop the car. You know, there's not friction rubbing up against them with the car in motion. They just really kind of sit still and hold. They do wear, but you know, if you never sit on your brake or forget it, the hand brake, not the normal brake, you won't really wear these out. So it's a good telltale sign. You can tell if these have been overheated, they'll glaze up and crack. They're not really designed to be used as normal brakes, so keep that in mind. But yeah, anyway, so the way to do this that I found that works best is I get like an 8 or 9 millimeter socket, and I kind of stick it through here. I push that up on the spring to compress it, and then I get a piece of pliers and kind of just twist them around. And you'll see once I get the spring out, there's actually a hook in there. So the hook is turned like this. If you imagine my finger being a slot, the hook is like this, and you have to compress it so that you can turn that hook. And once the hook is with essentially parallel with the slot, it slips right out and the spring comes out. So Not rocket science. We'll use this gap, get an 8 or a 9 mil. I've switched back and forth between the two. Sometimes one works. They both work. Everybody has different strategies when it comes to removing these, so there's no fixed strategy. Remove that one, remove that one, remove that spring down here, open the parking chute, get it over, and then we'll get to our dust shield bolts. Yep. So no dice. The springs were really seized on this side. Tried getting them off, ended up snapping both. Funny story on the other side, they came right off. Wasn't an issue at all, but oh well. Lo and behold, there is a tool for parking brake shoes, and from my understanding, everybody says that it is an invaluable tool, and it is very much so worth the investment. So we're gonna get a parking brake tool, and we're gonna go ahead and grab a bunch of new springs from FCP Euro. That way I just have them. Not that I plan on doing this job that often, but as you can see, things happen. So I'm gonna be waiting on parts from them. So this is, you know, no difference. I can't continue without the LCAs. Anyway, so once that shows up, then I can you know, complete the job. But anyway, so as you can see, the springs slot in through this slot here in the parking shoe and right there in the brake dust shield, and that's how they sit in there. So we'll get a broken spring here. 1 second, it's now stuck on the other spring. This hook essentially goes in there, twists, and that's what holds the shoe in place. And what you have to do is compress and turn it, and then it slides out. So it slides out both this slot and the slot on the brake dust shield. So if you do a brake job like this and you don't have the tool and you use the socket method, I'd recommend maybe grabbing some more extra springs just in case if you do break them. They will break if you twist them too much, and plus you don't want to, if you twist them too much and you make a hash of it, they're already weakened, so you want to replace them. But anyway, this gives us access to our 3 bolts. I'm going to spray these with penetrating oil. That side was easy removing them. However, on the front side, when I did have to remove them, these do strip very easily. They are Allen keys. So I'm going to just go ahead and spray them with penetrating oil right through the back of the shield here, because that'll creep into the threads and then where the head is, and then hopefully they come off. But that's the next step, is we need to pull the shield back so we can access everything else in the back. Okay, so these bolts have been soaking. These are 5 mil hex, or Allen, excuse me. There we go. Penetrating oil has done its job. Now there are any people who are commenting, oh, penetrating oil works or it doesn't work. I highly suggest, if you haven't subscribed to Project Farm, you should. He does a fantastic job of explaining different products, how they work in comparison. I will link him in the description for those who haven't heard of him. Highly suggest it. Take a look. So that will answer all the questions about penetrating oil. Now these do have a little bit of blue Loctite, so from factory, they are a bit stiff on the way out. So you don't have to worry that they're like rusted or seized. These actually still have their zinc coating, phenomenal. Excuse me, which is phenomenal. It doesn't look like they're really rusted, just the blue Loctite making them a little bit harder to remove, which is what the Loctite's supposed to do. So you can stick it through here, one of the lug nut holes, just be careful. And if it wants to cooperate, you unscrew it just like this. The alternative thing is, what you can do is just get a 5 mil, attach it to a drill, and run it through these holes. And then you should be able to unscrew them a lot faster than what I'm doing by hand here. In fact, I'm going to go do that. So a bit of a geek out moment again. What are we looking at here? So we have what is called a multi-link suspension. As the name implies, there are multiple links in the suspension system. So unlike a traditional McPherson or two-point control arm system, there are multiple links. Now a lot of German manufacturers and some other manufacturers have implemented this system on their car. So looking here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. This is a 4-point multi-link suspension. As the name implies, there are 4 different links on the suspension system here. We have our camber arm, we have our torque arm, we have our tie rod, and we have our thrust arm. Now, each individual arm, basically the reason for this, so people are probably asking why I have so many arms, because that's more failure points, more bushings, as well. If you think about when a wheel is rolling down the road, the forces that are exerted on the wheel aren't just necessarily back and forth, they're up and down. It's a complete radius, essentially, where it's taking forces from all angles. And when you have multiple links, it allows you to have better stability and control to essentially equalize and neutralize those different forces. So with a multi-link suspension system, it is more stable. It is a bit more comfortable because you can absorb bumps at a different rate. So it does have its advantages, other than, you know, you have to replace more bushings. So that's the only disadvantage of the service. But really, my multi-links, which this car is an 87, as you can see, there's very little play in any of them, including the tie rod, nothing. So they're not really torn. The only really big reason why I'm doing this is because there's what people call the the squeaky bushing, which is located down here on the lower control arm, that tends to tear and squeaks and clunks when it's out. So these aren't really worn, but since it's one of those, if I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and replace them. And they're very easy to replace. You don't have to press in these bushings. The arm just gets replaced. The tie rod does have the option to press in that bushing, and you can keep the existing tie rod, but I don't see the point of doing so, because, you know, you just replace the whole tie rod. One thing I will say about the tie rod is, and the nice thing about these cars is, I put in an adjustable camber arm. The factory one is kind of like this arm. It's not adjustable. I did order these parts from FCP. I didn't order this one, obviously, because I have an adjustable camber arm. If you do lower these vehicles, you do have to account for the fact that you will get an increased amount of camber, just because the geometry naturally in suspension, as the wheel lowers, it goes inwards, so you're going to get more camber. And the only way to correct that is to get camber arms, which will then push the wheel out. So if we see this wheel here, as you can imagine, it's pointing inwards. If I shorten this arm, it's going to pull the hub in, increasing my camber. If I lengthen the distance of this arm, it's going to push the hub out and essentially level out the wheel so that there's less camber. And it's the need for the adjustable camber arm, or the advantage. We're going to get into the specifics of the tie rod here in a little bit, but this does control the toe in and out. So if you imagine a tire sitting straight would have, and when I mean straight, it's parallel with the body, completely straight, is 0 toe. Any movement of the tire inwards is negative toe. Any movewards out is, positive toe. So the way this works is there's an eccentric bolt here, and again, we'll get more details, but as you turn the eccentric, that will shift this, push it out, or pull it in, giving you negative toe, pushing out, giving you positive toe, and somewhere in between, you would have that neutral 0 toe. So try to link some history behind this. They did spend a lot of money developing the suspension, and it is a phenomenal system. So we're going to go ahead and start removing things. One thing is, when we're replacing this lower arm, I will replace it, but I'm actually going to let it hang. And I learned this through the other side, because I put this on, took it off, put it on, took it off. You actually want to do this arm last, because it gets in the way of the tie rod. So, and plus, when you're getting down to that bushing down there, and the lower control arm, it's in the way again for when that bushing needs to be pressed out. So it's just easier to put the new one on and let it hang. This arm and the top arms can be put on without fault. They're not really in the way of any of the offending work that will be performed later on down on the underside here with these bushings on the car. So just a tip that I learned that you will need to do. Another thing, when you replace this arm, this plastic cover here, which is full of sand, will be put on the new arm. So that's all there is to it. Let's get to it. So we're going to begin with removing the torque strut here on stop. It is an M12 triple square on one side and an 18 mil just nut on the other side. So we're just going to wrap that in nice and snug. I bought this from a parts store for 10 bucks because I didn't have any triple square, believe it or not. I hate this set. be mindful there's a washer on the top there. This bolt will not pull out because I have to push on the knuckle to relieve the stress. So anytime you have a suspension bolt that won't come out, you don't really have to force it. Usually you can get a jack or move it, and then once you find that point where the bolt's no longer under stress, it'll just pop right out. The reason I'm not removing this is because it is so hard to see. But right in there is another nut and a triple square. So triple square on this side, and you can get a socket. Excuse me, not a socket, a wrench. Just, let me get that in there. Just barely through here. This one is the biggest pain to uninstall. If you're gonna loosen the nut there a little bit, and then I'm gonna pin that and then get the triple square, which I really hate. Or at least I just hate this tool because it's a 13 mil on a triple square long adapter mumbo jumbo adjustment. I don't know who came up with this tool, but it is awful. Oh, I don't know if I have the strength to do this. Maybe I do. There it is. Alright. Oh, yes. I have made a mistake. Alright, well, in my genius here, if you can see, let me get it in there. Hopefully the camera will adjust. Yep, you can see I got my the classic blunder where you get your wrench stuck. So use the open end on the side. It's not a big deal. I just need to pull the bolt out. It is already unscrewed, so I'm just gonna pull the bolt out from this side, pull it out from this side here. When I pull this one out, excuse me, I'll loosen up the arm and then I can wiggle it, and then that should take the pressure off that bolt in there and that nut, and it should just slip right out. There she is. There we go. So immediately after, I like to reinstall hardware, even if it comes with new hardware, just so I know how it went. All right, now this arm isn't under tension, and we can. There it goes. There goes the nut. No washer, just a nut. Flies off into the distance. Pull that bolt out. Here. And here's our arm. And we look at it, stick a bolt in there. Not a lot of play. No real visible cracking on the rubber. It does look a little fatigued, but there is no cracking. These are definitely still good to go. But we're gonna replace them anyway, so these are getting swapped. I don't know if this one came with new hardware from Limfoda, but we will give it a check right now. I think it does. I think the only hardware they didn't resend me is the bottom arm here, which is kind of weird. But yeah, I'll go double check that with the new arm. We can go ahead and put this arm back just as we removed it. Okay, so comparing new hardware, here's our old arm, new arm. Bushings are nice and new. You can see the old ones really aren't that bad. We did get new hardware. I got the bolt. There is a pin here. I forget the official name of these that do get, like, you can knock these out and put the new one in. It lives right there in the knuckle. But the old one is perfectly fine. It's not damaged or anything. It doesn't have any wear. So I don't really see the need to change them. I'm sure somebody knows the greater need or reason. So I don't bother changing unless it's really damaged. And in my case, it's not. So installation, opposite of removal. So just stick the arm in, put the bolts in, torque them snug. Not final torque yet. Of course, remember, we're going to final torque all of them when the axle is in the neutral position, or in other words, the position it is normally is in at the right height. So that's what we'll do later. But let's go ahead and put it back in. that's unfortunate. Push the pin out. I guess it's a good candidate now to put the new pin in. So that didn't happen on the other side, but here's the original, I guess, OEM pin. So I guess we'll put that back in. Really, it's opened up, so you just have to pinch it and then press it in. It's not that difficult. I say that, famous last words, is it's probably going to be very difficult to remove, now that I've mentioned that. Okay, let's see if the new one will go in without fighting me. And not really. There you go, figure. But you have new hardware. Why are you using old hardware? Yeah, well, because, you know, these are fine. I kind of like how zinced this one is. That's how easy it was to put in anyway. Sometimes people replace hardware, but oh, goodness gracious, the old hardware is perfectly fine. Oh, this one is really putting up a fight, isn't it? Let's see if I can do this on the first try. Am I that cool? Am I lucky? Lucky. Ha! I don't even remember how I did this on the other side. Oh, that's nice. That's just... So there's a... There's a shield in the way. That is wonderful. Oh joy. Oh yeah. Oh no. No! The sound of despair. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Oh. Alright, well, that makes it much more fun. I can't reach back in there because the plastic shield that covers the fuel pump is there, and if you drop the nut, it falls right in that shield. So I'm gonna get a magnet, see if I can fish that out, because I really don't have to take that shield off. Why do I do this? Where did it fall to? You gotta be kidding. Ah! I found it. Took a magnet to the bottom of the plastic pan. Voila. Now watch me immediately drop this again, because that would be my luck. This guy out. Oh yeah, that's just beautiful, yeah. All right, buddy, listen. I'm gonna very politely ask you to back out there a little bit for me, will ya? Let's try this again, shall we? Don't you do that to me now. What if we hold it with a magnet? Is that even smart? Oh, it is smart. Oh. Yes. Oh yeah. There we go. There we go. Oh yeah. Magnets, my friends. Magnet. Our torque strut is in. Voila. All right, next up, thrust arm. All right, isn't this in style now? Ripped jeans. These weren't ripped, by the way, before I ripped these. With these beautiful knees. Okay, so I think this is a good stopping point for part 1. We'll continue on the suspension in part 2, 3, and maybe even 4, depending on how the footage goes. So we'll see how that works out in terms of the time, but I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen so far. Again, if you have any comments, suggestions, or things you'd like to see or for me to improve on, please drop them down in the comments below. I'll try to respond as much as I can. If you have any technical questions or anything, feel free to ask as well. I'll try to answer the best of my ability, and if I can't answer, I'll point you hopefully in the right direction with great resources. So just want to say thanks. If you liked what you saw so far, please like, subscribe, share the video. It would help the channel kind of kick off. And again, I'm really just excited to see where we can go with this. Again, this is my first time doing videos, so I'm a bit of a scrub in that aspect. I know there's a lot of things I can improve on, and just looking at the footage and trying so hard not to cringe at things I've done, but I really just want to kind of take you along on this journey with me. I've been doing cars for a bit of time, and I think it'd be kind of fun to share these experiences with other people, and maybe there's something that I could learn, or give somebody else the opportunity that they, give the opportunity to give someone to learn something from either my mistakes or something that I've discovered. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in part 2.